The creation of a Jewish state relied on a single, non-negotiable requirement: people. Political Zionism was built on the premise that Jews worldwide needed to relocate to a new, sovereign territory in a massive demographic migration known as the ingathering of exiles. But the movement's leaders immediately hit a logistical wall. A large portion of the global Jewish population felt safe and assimilated in their home countries, and they had no desire to pack up and move to Palestine. To solve this reluctance, early Zionist leader David Ben-Gurion took a hard line. He told a gathering of Jewish Americans that he appealed to parents to bring their children, but noted he would relocate the youth to Israel against their will if necessary. Because voluntary immigration numbers remained low, leaders resorted to exploiting, exaggerating, and even directly manufacturing anti-Semitic threats to push populations into leaving their homes. This history reveals a demographic campaign that was highly engineered and ruthlessly enforced from its inception. We can trace the early stages of this strategy back to 1919. American diplomat Hugh Gibson arrived in Poland to serve as the U.S. ambassador and assess the living conditions of the local Jewish population. What Gibson found contradicted the narrative being pushed in America. He reported back to the State Department that reports of extreme anti-Semitic violence in Poland were heavily exaggerated, describing them as yarns manufactured by foreign actors for political purposes. When these diplomatic dispatches reached American Zionist leaders, the retaliation was swift. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis was furious and demanded a meeting to suppress Gibson's findings. In that meeting, Brandeis's protege Felix Frankfurter made a direct threat. He warned Gibson that if he continued reporting the truth about the relative safety of Polish Jews, Zionist lobbyists would block his Senate confirmation. Gibson was outraged. He wrote a 21-page letter to the State Department, warning of a conscienceless and cold-blooded plan to make the condition of the Jews in Poland so bad they must turn to Zionism for relief. The campaign against Hugh Gibson established a precedent for using political censorship and career sabotage to control the reporting of Jewish conditions. By the 1930s, David Ben-Gurion viewed the rise of Adolf Hitler as a fertile force that would drive mass immigration to Palestine. In 1933, some Zionist leaders established a working relationship with the Third Reich, drafting a pact known as the Transfer Agreement. This diagram illustrates the mechanics of the pact. In exchange for the Nazis allowing Jewish capital to be transferred to Palestine, Zionist leaders agreed to break a worldwide Jewish economic boycott that was impacting the German economy. As author Edwin Black points out, this arrangement effectively made Adolf Hitler the chief economic sponsor of the early Israeli state. The Nazis and Zionists actively collaborated on propaganda to promote emigration. A Nazi newspaper even published photographs of Jewish immigrants and minted a commemorative medal featuring a swastika on one side and a Star of David on the other. The ideological drive to populate Palestine was so absolute that leadership willingly enriched the architects of the Holocaust to achieve it. As the Holocaust reached its peak, Western nations attempted to establish safe havens to absorb the wave of Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi extermination. President Franklin D. Roosevelt spearheaded major international humanitarian rescue operations in 1938 and 1943 to extract these vulnerable populations. But Zionist leaders actively fought to block these rescue projects because the designated havens were located outside of Palestine. Morris Ernst, FDR's international envoy for refugees, worked tirelessly on these operations, only to be attacked by Zionist leaders. He wrote in his memoir that these political figures were little concerned about human blood if it is not their own. The political pressure from American Zionist leadership became so intense that FDR eventually abandoned his rescue plans, telling Ernst that the vocal leadership simply wouldn't stand for them. Faced with the choice between immediate safety for refugees or the political goal of populating Palestine, Zionist leadership prioritized the latter, leaving thousands trapped in Hitler's Europe. After the creation of Israel in 1948, the demographic campaign shifted from Europe to the massive, deeply rooted populations of Arab Jews living in the Middle East. In Iraq, the Jewish population largely rejected Zionism. The chief rabbi of Iraq stated that Iraqi Jews enjoyed equal rights alongside Arabs, had lived there for 1,000 years, and did not view themselves as a separate part of the nation. Because political and economic pressure failed to move the Iraqi Jews, Zionist operatives transitioned to covert physical violence. Former CIA operative Wilbur Crane Eveland documented the escalation. Zionist agents planted live explosives inside Iraqi synagogues and the U.S. Information Service Library in Baghdad to portray Iraqis as violently anti-American and anti-Semitic. Immediately after the bombs detonated, leaflets appeared urging the terrified Jewish population to flee to Israel for their own survival. Naim Giladi, a Jewish Iraqi author who survived this campaign, summarized the reality of the operation. To force the ingathering, Jews murdered Jews. When cultural roots prevented voluntary migration, the state-building apparatus weaponized legal terrorism against its own people, silencing foreign diplomats, funding the Third Reich, blocking Holocaust rescues, and bombing Arab synagogues. The documented historical record of how Israel gathered its population stands in contrast to the prevailing public myth of an organic founding. The early Zionist movement prioritized its own geopolitical dominance over the physical safety and autonomy of the Jewish diaspora. Understanding the roots of the modern Middle Eastern conflict requires an examination of this foundational history of forced displacement and coercion. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Bookish Breakdown. If you found this information valuable, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and let's get a conversation started in the comments. Until next time, keep reading and keep questioning.